Hey guys, it's Fox from Inferno Fox Gaming. So as you guys know, I do love my RPGs, but I've really only expanded my horizons beyond Final Fantasy within about the last 5 years or so. And one of this type of expansion that I did was playing Persona 5, and then Persona 5 Royal about a year after when that came out. Persona 5 was phenomenal for a number of reasons. You've got the excellent turn-based battle system, you've got Best Girl Makoto, you've got an awesome high-energy jazz-inspired soundtrack, you've got Best Girl Makoto, you've got a very compelling story with fantastic character development. Also, Best Girl Makoto, a colorful anime aesthetic, while also not being afraid to get pretty dark, and there was one other one. Oh yeah, Best Girl Makoto. When I heard Persona 3 was getting a remake, remaster, a new updated version, I felt it was time to jump in on this particular entry in the Persona series. Do note, with this review, I'm coming into this game without having played any of those previous versions. This includes the original that released on the PS2 back in 2006, the FES version released a year later, that I believe also included the answer, which is like an epilogue, like a 30-hour long epilogue. And then finally the PSP version released in 2009, which got ported to all major consoles in 2023. By not playing these previous versions, I suppose it allows me to experience the game with an untainted view. Not only do I think this helped, I also managed to avoid any spoilery territory before and during my gameplay, which is pretty impressive considering how old the game is, and it's a huge nod to my great friends who, when I mentioned I was playing Persona 3 for the first time, they didn't spoil anything for me for this game. So let's jump right into it. Let's talk about the graphics. Now, the overall graphics aren't going to win any medals or anything for looking outstanding. The game is not meant to portray realistic-looking graphics like an Elden Ring or something. Instead, the overall environments and characters themselves do look great for the overall anime aesthetic that it overall encapsulates, kind of taking a number of beats from Persona 5. I'd argue 3 Reload actually looks a bit better than Persona 5 and Royal, but again, it shouldn't be a surprise since 3 Reload is the newer game. Character models also have never looked better. Profile pictures are reminiscent to 5 and Royal's overall style. The character models, polygonal models themselves, look good and are quite expressive, though sometimes I notice in more banal conversation they have like a generic looking smile that's often seen, but you know, it is what it is. And speaking of environments, one of the most common of that is the pretty much central dungeon of it called Tartarus. And it is appropriately creepy from the outside, but the inner look of it sported a variety of somewhat differing environments, but a couple of them of note, like I liked the colorful nightclub look that the second to last area, I think it was called Haraba, and then the last area of Tartarus called Adama scared the crap out of me because I saw a black feather fall from the top of the screen when I first approached this, and I was like, oh crap, it's Sephiroth, because I had just finished my playthrough on Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and of course, you know, Sephiroth's going to be on the brain. But where Persona 5 and Royal led with an upbeat jazz-like soundtrack, we see 3 Reload with a sort of like hip-hop vibe to it. And as I've mentioned before on previous videos, I'm old, but I really dug the soundtrack, up to and including this hip-hop sound with the lyrics and music and everything, especially that was presented in the main standard battle theme. Just like Persona 5, the themes that play for the boss battles are absolute bangers too. I did get a little tired of some of the general themes that played during like normal conversations and interactions, as well as like social links. Though honestly, I did have the same issue with Persona 5 and Royal. You know, you spend 60 plus hours with an RPG, you're bound to hear some repeats. But yeah, besides that, the music though was quite excellent. Now let's discuss the gameplay. And the biggest gameplay elements for Persona 3 Reload: fighting interesting and creepy looking shadows, and dating high school girls.
That's what I love about these high school girls, man. I get older, they stay the same age.
The game essentially feels like a dating and social interaction sim, but there is a purpose to it all. By successfully forging strong connections with various characters, it allows the protagonist to increase something called an arcana specific to the individual said protagonist establishes links with. In doing so, the player is then able to fuse stronger personas related to that arcana that the protagonist can equip and use in battle, as well as create the strongest versions of those arcanas in late game, should the player actually manage to max out that specific social link or arcana. Unlike previous versions of Persona 3, the player has the ability to just say no to the ladies and friend zone them. Some of these interactions are actually quite nuanced too, and add a lot of excellent character depth and development to the individual that the protagonist is developing the social link with. Beyond this, kind of as I mentioned before, the biggest part of the game takes place in Tartarus, the primary dungeon. Between developing social links and exploring this huge procedurally generated dungeon, the player can purchase equipment and items for he and his teammate at the local mall. Nearly all of the action itself does take place at Tartarus, which was a surprising change for me, as I was used to exploring mementos in Persona 5 and Royal, but then exploring dungeons called palaces that were unique to wherever the story was at in 5 and Royal. No matter where the story was in 3 Reload, the player could explore Tartarus at their leisure, and it really not have that much of an impact on the story at all, not counting the very end of the game. Exploration of Tartarus is done, again, through procedurally generated areas that are designed not to repeat, not counting the gatekeeping areas or the dead ends that lock the player out from getting higher before the major story beats that occur monthly on a specific event that happens. Standard areas in Tartarus often have breakable containers that have sellable materials or low-level item curatives. Also, it has treasures that are able to be opened or can be unlocked with something called Twilight Shards, which can be found in the real world or given by the Velvet Room attendant, Elizabeth. Enemy shadows come in a number of varieties, from like standard to harder than normal to rare ones, or like these weird hand-like creatures. These weird hand-like creatures net really a nice amount of experience points or gold should the player actually be able to beat them. Exploration of Tartarus sees the player encounter the primary opponents in the game, shadows, which of course initiates the battles. So, talking about the battle system, as I mentioned earlier, it is turn-based. It's also fairly similar to how Persona 5 and Royal are. While there's no gun option, the player can select options like attack, defend, use an item, use their persona's special abilities, and then also special abilities called Thurgies that unlock not too far into the game for each specific character. Nearly all of the enemies have an elemental or affinity weakness that can be exploited, and if all the enemies in battle are hit with this weakness, the player can initiate an all-out attack, which causes big damage to all the enemies, and if they're all defeated, it ends in a victory. Character actions are expressive and colorful, and there really wasn't too much enemy variety, and it kind of seemed like there were a lot of color swaps. I thought this was different from Persona 5 and Royal, though enemies there were often the actual personas that could be bargained with or gained to join the protagonist's list of available personas. It sort of felt like with that less amount of enemy variety, it was kind of like, I wouldn't say it got boring, but you kind of knew what was coming, especially once you hit that 20 or 30 hour mark. The game offers a number of different difficulty modes, which is nice for newbies or individuals that just want to enjoy the story. I played on the mid-level normal mode, and for me, it presented enough challenge to make the battles and gameplay fun, but not too much to make it annoying or frustrating. Now, there were some annoying battles in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Again, this was the last major RPG I played, so going into Persona 3 Reload during my time with it, not really finding that at all was kind of like a breath of fresh air, so that was really good to experience. While all of this occurs, the player progresses through a calendar of days where certain social links may or may not be available, depending on the events going on in the month with the story, or even like the day of the week. What was refreshing for me is that the player is put into this like system of days progression and the ability to explore the primary dungeon Tartarus. Like, it felt like within an hour or so of starting the game. I remember in Persona 5 and Royal being several hours in before this system kicked in. So in that way, Persona 3 just jumped in pretty quickly. It was kind of a nice change of pace. Now, let's talk about some of the story beats. While I feel that Persona 3 Reload has a strong story with important themes, I do think that Persona 5 and Royal has the stronger story. Maybe that's the result of the sense of escalation that 5 and Royal had. As they continued, the stakes got higher and higher, while also sort of becoming more personal in a way. 3's stories also had a lot of high stakes, but not really until the end. Not until like the last 10% of the game. The why they fight stayed the same throughout the great majority of it. It was just within that last 10% to stop that world-ending event did that truly become like the highest stakes possible. One of the best things that I liked with Persona 3 over 5 is that the protagonist, he joined an already formed group with a clear leader that was bent on fighting the enemy, in this case the Shadows. This protagonist was not the glue that bonded everyone together like Joker was in Persona 5 and Royal. While the protagonist in 3 does end up becoming the leader, he still feels like just another individual within the larger cohesive group. Perhaps one of the most uninteresting out of the bunch, if I'm being totally honest. Now, from here on out, I'm going to be starting to get into spoiler territory. So again, I'm issuing the obligatory spoiler warning. Though, is it really necessary for a game that technically has been out for almost 2 decades now? Either way, please go to the time at the top of the screen here if you want to avoid any spoilery type discussion. Again, time at the top of the screen. If you want to avoid the spoilers, skip to there and I'll give you my ranking and rating and everything like that. Are you still here? Are you still there? Okay, let's talk about the story. But with the story, I'd like to more focus on mostly the characters themselves, because they really made the game. They really made the story. Starting with the character Junpei, I originally thought that he was being set up as like a one-note best friend archetype, kind of like how Ryuji from Persona 5 and Royal was. Heck, I felt like they even sounded the same. Persona 5 and Royal's Ryuji was voiced by Max Middleman, and Persona 3 Reload's Junpei was voiced by Zena Robinson for the English VAs. But Junpei ended up being and getting a lot of character development, I felt. More than Ryuji from Persona 5, in my opinion. Junpei felt listless and out of control with his overall life, and I think that sort of gave him like this sense of competition with the protagonist to try and vie for like that sort of like leader position about like within the first like third of the game. Once he found Chidori, the part of the Strega group, and then they developed a sort of like relationship with one another, it showed that he was more than just that sort of single archetype. This relationship itself was one of the many highlights within the story. It was like Shakespearean-esque in nature, with them appearing to be like star-crossed lovers due to being on opposite sides of a feud. And can I just take a moment to just point out how adorable Yukari is? I ended up having my protagonist develop the romantic relationship with her and send all the other female social links to the friend zone, including Mitsuru. Not only does Yukari have the girl next door looks, she's also strong as heck, both with her magical skills in battle, as well as her strong will and desire to reach her goals. I really felt like she helped to be there for not only the protagonist, also didn't take any crap from the wiseacre Junpei, but also surprisingly learned not to take crap from her senpai Mitsuru, and even ended up developing like a genuine friendship with her that went beyond like the sort of intimidation factor I think Yukari felt with Mitsuru. And the rest of the cast of the C's group were absolutely great. Within the cast of C's themselves, I used Aragaki and Aegis the least. Nothing against edgelords or robots, but both types of characters kind of have been played out in RPGs before, and then also with their battles, I really wasn't interested in the fighting styles. Their stories, though, were fascinating. I made sure to complete the whole Leave of Absence storyline with Aragaki, with the protagonist's ultimate fate literally being bound because of Aegis. I found him spending his last moments with her kind of somewhat wistful. He wouldn't have been there if his fate wasn't bound to Ryoji had it not been for Aegis. It also made me wonder if Aegis herself had lost her mechanical edge after her one-sided fight with Ryoji. I think that was in December, late November. The game itself, the game makes it seem like it was a revelation she got from accepting what life is and her own abilities to protect what is important to her. But could there have been something in her repair process after the Ryoji fight at the Kirijo group that sort of triggered that humanity within her? Also, I have to make mention of the Shiba Inu Kodomaru, since this channel's namesake is also based on a Shiba. I was surprised to see a dog and later a little kid join the group. I never really warmed to Amada the kid, but Kodomaru was super cute, what with fighting the knife in his mouth. His own story with losing his original owner, the priest, was heartbreaking to hear, as well as the accident when he was hurt too. But him staying resolute, guarding the shrine, constantly revisiting it with the protagonist and the rest of C's, as well as joining C's themselves, shows a large amount of heart for such a little beast. And it just shows how much heart and determination can come in such a small package. I also loved a lot of the many social links that the protagonist developed, but one that really resonated with me was the one with Akinari Kamiki, i.e. the dying young man. And it was sadly ironic that the dying hopeless person was representative of the Sun Arcana. Even knowing that he was passing away, his conversations with the protagonist, as well as developing his story, allowed him to find purpose in life and learn to be grateful for the short amount of time that he had on this earth. At the end of the game, the protagonist's conversation with his mother really cemented this, as she was glad to hear from him that he was glad to have actually lived and been given that life. And she vowed to live her life and experience many things sort of in his name and in his honor, which it was really touching to see and to be able to find hope, to find the sun even after that sort of hope has been blotted out. When I finished Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, I didn't really feel much in the way of emotions like I did with the ending of Persona 3 Reload. YouTube content creator Pro Jared explained really so well and succinctly in his review of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth why he didn't really have that sort of emotion either. Though during his explanations, be warned, it is contained in his spoilers section part of the video. And he explained that at the end of the game and the ending itself, it sort of triggered the more logical puzzle-solving part of the brain as it tried to decipher the events as they unfolded at said part. I mean, the game was made by Nomura, the creator and runner of the Kingdom Hearts series, so you know there might be some sort of like plot-driven craziness. To that end, and for that reason, as well as a combined feeling of just being glad that I was done with Rebirth, as well as beating the really, really annoying last phase of the long gambit of last bosses, it sort of tampered down the end of that game. Now, finishing both Persona 3 Reload and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth were 65-hour plus experiences for me, but again, it was 3 Reload that I found myself truly feeling more something from. Seeing the main protagonist at the end sort of fade away, as well as experiencing the Sun Arcana social link, as I mentioned earlier, especially during the epilogue, gave me that overall sense of malaise or sadness. It made me wonder a number of things, like the day was won, but at what cost? Why did a young man have to die and give his life just so that all the others could live? Should we be grateful that he, the protagonist like Kamiki, was able to have the experiences that he got, as well as the opportunity to embrace his destiny to save the world? And I loved watching the protagonist's interactions with everybody at the end, but upon looking back, it was heartbreaking, especially watching his interaction with Yukari. Now, I did have the romantic relationship with the Adorbs Yukari. So while she was, talking about future plans and thinking about, okay, we're going to do this and that together and everything, knowing that he'll never be able to do anything like that with her, or establish a life with her, or experiencing anything else like everyone else within Seas is going to be able to do, or everyone else, it was really painful to truly understand and comprehend after the end credits had rolled and everything, and the end screen had appeared. For me personally, I did lose an aunt that I was close with really recently, so the idea of death is still very close in my mind. And just the ending with this really resonated with me greatly, and it had me consider her life and the time that she had, as well as the relationship that I had with her, and how fortunate I was the time that I was able to have with this person. And boy, do I totally understand now why blue is the main color and theme for this particular game, and why it was featured so heavily. And kind of, let's get out of the forest and sort of look at the trees here. The ability to not just put oneself in the shoes of a protagonist or various characters, to feel the emotions that they're experiencing through their actions and what occurs on the screen, isn't nearly as important as just the simple act of just feeling something, getting something from this experience. And to me, it's this that makes RPGs really special, and what makes good games great. Now, I'm giving Persona 3 Reload a 10 out of 10. It takes the wrappings from Persona 5 and Persona 5 Royal and breathes new life on this earlier entry in the series. There's great anime aesthetics that feature good-looking character models and well-detailed environments, absolutely stellar sound, including excellent voice acting and a surprisingly great hip-hop based soundtrack. There are fun simulation elements generating social interactions with various characters and NPCs, and a great turn-based battle system with fights that can be challenging, but nothing inherently unfair. I absolutely loved my time with this game, and I was glad to get back into it after having to set it aside to pick up and finish Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Now let me know in the comments section below what you think of Persona 3. Persona 3 Reload, FES, PSP, whatever. Have you played any of these versions of Persona 3 before? Are you going to be picking up Reload? Definitely would love to hear from you guys. Otherwise, thanks again for watching, and have a great day.
Before I go, take good care of the ones you hold dear. If you wait until their day comes, it's too late. Everyone who's born will die someday. Not just Akinari, or me, or even you. So before that happens, it doesn't take a grand gesture. If you love someone, let them know it. We all go through life. We should all lift each other up. I'm sure you have something precious you can share with people too. Don't ever forget it.